My parents want me gone but still expect my money. Move away but keep sending cash, they demanded. I just smiled and nodded. Then I made a decision that left them both speechless the next day. I, Ethan, 29M, always knew Linda and Frank saw me as their personal ATM, but I never expected them to be so blatant about it until last Tuesday. The conversation started innocently enough when I visited their house for what I thought would be a normal family dinner. Linda had made her usual overcooked roast, and Frank was already 3 beers deep by the time I walked through the door. The atmosphere felt different, though, heavier, like they were building up to something. After we finished eating, they exchanged glances across the table. Frank cleared his throat and told me they needed to talk. My stomach dropped, because that phrase never led anywhere good in our family. Linda fidgeted with her napkin while Frank launched into what felt like a rehearsed speech about how I was 29 now and needed to start my own life, somewhere else. The words hit me like a slap. They wanted me to move out of town, not just out of their house, but completely away from our city. Frank explained that having me around made them feel like they couldn't enjoy their retirement properly. Linda nodded along, adding that they felt judged by my presence, like I was constantly watching and criticizing their choices. But here's where it got really twisted. In the same breath, Frank mentioned that they'd still need my financial help with their mortgage and medical bills. Linda chimed in about how their fixed income wasn't enough to maintain their lifestyle. They expected me to relocate somewhere far enough away that I wouldn't be a daily reminder of their failures as parents, but close enough financially that I could keep funding their comfortable retirement. I sat there processing their words while they outlined their expectations. They wanted me gone within 2 months but expected the monthly transfers to continue indefinitely. The audacity was breathtaking. They were essentially asking me to pay rent on a house I'd be banned from visiting while covering expenses for people who found my existence inconvenient. My mind raced through years of similar moments. Every birthday they forgot until the last minute, every achievement they dismissed because it didn't directly benefit them, every time they called asking for money but never once asked how I was doing. The pattern was so clear now that I wondered how I'd missed it for so long. I smiled and nodded, telling them I understood their position and would think about their request. Frank seemed relieved that I wasn't arguing. Linda actually looked surprised that I was taking it so well. They probably expected tears or anger or desperate pleading. Instead, I helped clear the dishes, hugged them goodbye, and drove home with a strange sense of clarity. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the conversation and what it really meant. They didn't want a son. They wanted a silent business partner who funded their lifestyle from a distance. The realization hurt, but it also freed something inside me. For the first time in years, I felt like I could see the relationship clearly, without the fog of obligation and guilt. Wednesday morning, I called my bank and made some arrangements. I also reached out to my lawyer to discuss a few legal matters that had been on my mind. By Thursday, I had a plan that felt both satisfying and completely justified. Friday arrived, and I drove back to Linda and Frank's house with a folder full of documents. They were expecting an update on my moving plans, probably hoping I'd already started looking at apartments in other cities. Instead, I sat them down at the same kitchen table where they delivered their ultimatum. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document, a detailed breakdown of every dollar I'd given them over the past 5 years. The number was staggering, even to me. Between mortgage help, car repairs, medical bills, vacation funding, and general living expenses, I transferred over $80,000 to them. Frank's face went pale when he saw the total. Linda asked what this was all about, and I explained that I'd been doing some financial planning for my future. Since they wanted me to move away and start fresh, I needed to understand exactly how much of my income had been going towards supporting their lifestyle. The math was eye-opening. Then I pulled out the second document, a formal notice that I was discontinuing all financial assistance effective immediately. I explained that since they wanted me out of their lives, it seemed logical that my money should leave with me. After all, accepting money from someone you don't want around felt hypocritical. Frank started to protest, saying that wasn't what they meant. Linda jumped in, trying to clarify that they just wanted some space, not a complete cutoff. But I was ready for this response. I reminded them of their exact words from Tuesday night, how my presence made them uncomfortable and how they needed me gone to enjoy their retirement. The third document was even better. I'd calculated their monthly expenses based on the bills I'd been helping with and compared it to their actual retirement income. The shortfall was significant. Without my contributions, they'd need to downsize their house, sell one of their cars, and drastically change their lifestyle within 6 months. I watched their faces as the reality sank in. They'd been so focused on getting rid of me that they hadn't considered the financial implications. Frank asked if we could work out some kind of compromise, maybe where I moved to a nearby city but kept helping with major expenses. Linda suggested that perhaps they'd been too hasty in their request. But I wasn't interested in negotiations anymore. I told them I'd actually taken their advice to heart, and would indeed be starting fresh. Completely fresh. No more monthly transfers. No more emergency bailouts. No more funding their lifestyle while being treated like an inconvenience. The fourth document was my favorite. I'd researched the local housing market and found several smaller homes and apartments that would fit their actual budget. I'd even printed out listings and highlighted the ones that seemed most suitable for a couple living solely on retirement income. The gesture was helpful, and petty, in equal measure. Frank's voice got louder as he insisted they'd raised me and deserved my support. Linda started crying, saying they never meant for things to go this far. But their words felt hollow after years of taking my money while treating me like a burden. I'd finally understood that respect and love couldn't be bought, and I was tired of trying. I stood up to leave, but not before delivering the final piece of my plan. I told them I'd be moving away, as they requested, but I'd chosen a city about 8 hours away. Far enough that spontaneous visits would be impossible, but close enough that I could still hear about their struggles through mutual friends and extended family. The beauty of my decision was its completeness. They'd get exactly what they asked for, my absence from their daily lives. But they'd also get exactly what they deserved. The full financial responsibility for the lifestyle they'd grown accustomed to funding with my money. As I walked toward the door, Linda called after me, asking when I'd be moving and whether we could talk more about the financial arrangement. I turned back and smiled, the same smile I'd given them Tuesday night. I told her I'd be gone within the month, just as they'd requested, and that our financial arrangement was already finalized. It no longer existed. Frank followed me outside, trying one last appeal to my sense of family obligation. He reminded me that they were getting older and would need more help, not less. But his words only reinforced my decision. They wanted the benefits of having a son without any of the actual relationship. That wasn't family. It was exploitation with a biological twist. Update 1: The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I'd found a great job opportunity in Denver that actually paid more than my current position. The irony wasn't lost on me. By cutting ties with Linda and Frank's financial demands, I was free to pursue better opportunities without worrying about maintaining their lifestyle. They called several times during this period. Each conversation followed the same pattern. They'd start by asking about my moving plans, then gradually work their way around to discussing their upcoming bills. Frank mentioned that their property taxes were due soon. Linda brought up some dental work she needed. Each time, I politely redirected the conversation back to my relocation timeline and wished them luck with their financial planning. The most telling moment came when Linda asked if I'd at least help them through the transition period while they figured out their new budget. I reminded her that transitions were exactly what they'd wanted, for me to transition out of their lives so they could enjoy their retirement. It seemed counterproductive to delay that process with continued financial entanglement. 3 weeks after our kitchen table confrontation, I loaded my belongings into a moving truck. Frank and Linda stood in their driveway watching, and the scene felt surreal. Frank looked older somehow, like the stress of their new financial reality was already taking its toll. Linda kept wringing her hands and making comments about how we should stay in better touch. I hugged them both goodbye, and for a moment, I almost felt bad about my decision. But then Frank whispered that I should call if I changed my mind about helping out, and the feeling passed. Even in our goodbye, he was still thinking about my wallet rather than our relationship. Update 2: Denver turned out to be everything I'd hoped for and more. My new job was challenging and rewarding, and I'd made friends who actually seemed interested in me as a person, rather than as a source of financial support. For the first time in years, I was saving money instead of constantly transferring it to cover other people's poor planning. About 2 months after my move, I got a call from my aunt, Linda's sister. She'd heard about the family situation and wanted to check on everyone. During our conversation, she mentioned that my parents had been asking relatives for loans to cover some unexpected expenses. Apparently, they'd been telling people that I'd abandoned them in their time of need. The narrative they were spinning painted me as an ungrateful son who'd cut off his struggling parents without warning. They conveniently omitted the part where they demanded I leave town while expecting continued financial support. My aunt seemed surprised when I explained the actual sequence of events. She asked if I thought I was being too harsh, and I told her about the folder of documents I prepared. When she heard the total amount I'd been contributing and the circumstances of their ultimatum, her tone changed completely. She admitted that she'd been feeling guilty about not helping them more, but now she understood why they were suddenly in such dire financial straits. The conversation with my aunt was enlightening in another way. She mentioned that Linda and Frank had been living beyond their means for years, even before I started helping them. The financial support I'd been providing hadn't been covering emergencies. It had been subsidizing a lifestyle they couldn't actually afford. My money had enabled their poor financial decisions, rather than helping them through temporary difficulties. 6 months into my new life in Denver, I received an unexpected visitor. Frank had driven 8 hours to show up at my apartment unannounced. He looked exhausted and defeated, and I almost felt sorry for him, until he started talking. He said he'd come to apologize. But his apology was really just another request for money disguised as remorse. He explained that they'd had to sell their house and move into a smaller place. Linda was working part-time at a grocery store to help make ends meet. They both realized how much they depended on my financial support and wanted to make things right. But making things right, in his mind, meant me resuming the monthly transfers while they promised to treat me better. He assured me that they'd never ask me to move away again, and that they'd be more appreciative of my help. The offer felt like a business negotiation rather than a family reconciliation. I listened to his entire pitch before responding. I told him I was glad they'd learned to live within their means, and that Linda's part-time job sounded like a healthy way to stay active in retirement. I mentioned how proud I was that they'd downsized responsibly and were taking control of their financial situation. Frank's face fell as he realized I wasn't going to resume funding their lifestyle. He asked what it would take for me to forgive them and help out again. I explained that forgiveness and financial support were two separate issues. I could forgive them for treating me poorly, but I wouldn't go back to enabling their irresponsible spending. The conversation lasted about an hour, and by the end, Frank seemed to understand that this wasn't a negotiation. I wasn't angry anymore, but I also wasn't going to return to our old dynamic. He'd driven 8 hours hoping to restore his income stream, but he was leaving empty-handed. Before he left, I gave him a small gift, a financial planning book that had helped me understand healthy money management. I told him it might help them build a sustainable budget for their actual retirement income. The gesture was genuine, even if it wasn't what he'd come hoping to receive. As I watched him drive away, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the relationship we'd never really had, and relief that I'd finally stopped trying to buy their love with my bank account. They taught me an invaluable lesson about setting boundaries, even if that wasn't their intention. The decision to cut off financial support had been difficult, but 6 months later, I knew it was right. Linda and Frank had wanted me gone, but expected my money to stay. Instead, they got exactly what they asked for, my complete absence from their financial picture. Sometimes, the best way to give people what they want is to take them at their word, even when they don't really mean it.